Welcome back. This week we're going to be covering pistol reloads and how to perform them well. We'll cover the three main types of pistol reloads that you can perform, what they're used for, when to do them, and most importantly, how to perform them effectively. We'll also be bringing on a special guest, USPSA Grandmaster Jay Beal, to talk to us about training strategies for the reload once you've achieved a certain level of competency. Let's get right into it. Okay, so the three reloads I'm talking about is different from the three types of draw from our video on how to draw your gun. Of course, that was dependent on what type of setup you had, whereas the three reloads here are actually dependent on what is going on with your gun when you decide to feed it again. People refer to these reloads with different names, but I'm simply going to call them the normal reload, the slide lock reload, and then the tactical reload. Okay, if you've watched any of my past videos, you know that I really like to harp on principles before we talk about techniques. This video is going to be no different. So the three main things I want to discuss real quick are grip, vision, and then timing as they pertain to reloads. So when it comes to grip, all I really want you to focus on is making sure that you are rebuilding your grip as soon as possible after your reload. So if I'm reloading, I just want to be making sure that I am immediately rolling my hand back to where it belongs and maintaining good pressure the moment I get right back on the gun. The second principle I really care about here is vision. Now, there's a lot of instructors that teach you to keep your eyes on the threat while you're reloading, and I do not subscribe to that line of thinking because I find it pointless to eye-fuck something that you need to be shooting at when you have a dead gun in your hands. It's going to be much more beneficial for you to take that 0.1 or 0.2 of a second to glance at a specific spot on your mag well to make sure that you're going to get your reload consistently compared to looking around at whatever you're supposed to be shooting without something that you can solve the problem with. Now, the last principle I mentioned was timing. Now, in a practical setting like a shooting competition, all this really means is that you want to be timing your reloads in such a way that you're doing other things as well. So for example, if I have to move from point A to point B at some point in a stage, and it would be smart for me to reload during that movement, I'm going to do that because absorbing the time it would take for me to reload my gun with something like movement is going to be way faster for me than standing in a spot where I could be shooting and having to perform a static reload right there. Now that we've talked about the principles that we're going to follow for each of these reloads, let's talk about the specific reloads themselves. Okay, the first type of reload we're going to be covering is the normal reload. I call it the normal reload because this is the one that typically happens the most often when you're planning your reload and you know what's going on. You do a normal reload when you have a hot chamber, but you simply have either a partially full or an empty magazine that you want to replace with a full magazine. So all we're going to be doing is breaking our grip, hitting the mag release right as we break our grip. Now, we do not need to flip the magazine out of the gun or do anything like that. I actually prefer to hit the magazine release when the gun is vertical because that way it will drop the quickest. If you try to drop your magazine when the gun is canted like this, it may have trouble compared to when gravity is working with you, right? So what we're going to do again is break our grip. Our support hand is immediately going to go for our extra magazine if we're doing this from concealment. Of course, you have to get your garment out of the way, and it's going to look something like this. Now, as you can see, no matter what setup you have, when you are grabbing your magazine, you want to do it by grabbing with your index finger on the side that faces the bullets. That way, you can index your index finger off the front of the mag well and simply roll the magazine into the gun with the palm of your hand. I'm going to do this slowly for you, and then I'll do it a bit quicker so you can see what a decent rep should look like. So here's slowly. And then here's quicker. A quick dry fire tip for when you're reloading. You've noticed that I have an old magazine that's dropping to the floor, and then after every single rep, I'm having to bend over and pick it up to reset the drill. When I normally dry fire reloads, what I'm going to do is not have the old magazine in the gun at all. I'll simply have an empty mag well, and I'm going to press the button, and then I'm going to simply put the new magazine into the gun. That way, when I reset the drill, all I have to do is take my new magazine out of the gun, put it back in the pouch, and I'm reset. If you feel like you're having a hard time getting your old magazine out of the gun, maybe you're trying to flip it or you're holding the gun too far sideways as you're hitting the mag release, go ahead, put the old magazine in there and confirm that the magazine is falling out properly. Cool, that covers us for the normal reload. I did this with the appendix carry rig because most of you have one of those and you're not shooting matches even though you should. We're going to switch this up to the competition rig now, but again, nothing will change. All of our principles will stay the same. Now the second type of reload we're going to talk about is the slide lock reload. Now this is probably one of the most sexy reloads in terms of Hollywood stuff, but frankly, this is a reload that you want to avoid through planning. You absolutely have to do it. It's typically an emergency and needs to be solved as soon as possible. Now, this does not mean that you should have any extra mental pressure when your slide locks back. We want to be performing all of these gun handling actions as quickly as possible, so just get it done and do not fumble it by trying to over-try. So the slide lock reload in practice is going to be pretty much the same as the normal reload, except of course we have to hit the slide release with our thumb. Now, there's a lot of instructors that say when your adrenaline is pumping, you shouldn't be relying on fine motor skills like the slide release, and that you should use your gross motor skills to rack the gun instead of using the control that was designed to perform the action that you're trying to do. The problem with this line of thinking is the fact that nearly every other shooting fundamental involves fine motor skills. So if you're not going to be able to hit a slide release under pressure, you're not going to be able to put rounds on target under pressure anyways, and then you're fucked. Enough about that though, use your slide release if your gun has one. Let's talk about how to do this reload. Again, it's going to be just the same as our normal reload. We're going to be breaking our grip, dropping the old magazine, and then grabbing the new magazine as soon as possible with our support hand, picking that spot with our vision, sending the magazine home, and as the magazine is seated, we're going to hit the slide release with our thumb. Okay, just like the last reload, we're going to do this slowly so you can see the motions, and then we'll pick up the speed so you can see what a decent rep looks like. So here's slowly. And then here's faster. All right, that covers us for the slide lock reload. Again, this is super simple compared to the normal reload. We're just adding that one extra step of hitting the slide release as that new magazine is inserted. Now let's talk about the tactical reload. All right, so the tactical reload is different from the other two reloads in that we are actually going to be keeping the old magazine from the reload. We're either going to be putting it back into a pouch, throwing it into a dump pouch, wherever it needs to go on our person to stay with us. Now, the tactical reload is actually the one I use the least because in a practical setting, the only time you're really going to be using it is if you're competing in an IDPA match, because they have a rule where you cannot drop magazines that still have ammunition in them onto the floor for whatever reason. All right, now to perform the tactical reload, the first thing we're going to do differently is delay when we hit the magazine release. So we're going to break our grip and the support hand is going to come for that new magazine the exact same way that we have been, with our index finger on the bullet side. And as you can see, if I were to open my hand up, I've got quite a bit of empty space. So what we're going to do is bring our hand there, let the base pad of the old magazine fill the empty space, and now I'm going to hit the magazine release. I'm pulling the magazine out, rolling my hand, and then letting the new magazine come in by rolling my hand back into the mag well the exact same way you would with any other reload. Now we have the old magazine. We're going to put it back into the pouch. All right, just like the last two, we're going to demonstrate this slowly so you get the motions, and then we'll do it faster. So here's slowly. And then here's faster. Again, I'm really going to harp on the vision principle here, because if you're not using your eyes to direct where these magazines are going, you're going to be fumbling around a bit. Whether it's when the new magazine is coming in, you need to be picking that specific spot so that the new magazine knows where to go. And then once you have the old magazine in your hand, you need to just glance down at the pouch or the dump pouch, wherever it's going, and putting it in there. One quick note about gear, we don't talk about it much on this channel, but this could be helpful. The way you orient your mags is pretty important. There's really two acceptable ways to do this. You have what's called bullets in, which is where the bullets are all facing towards your center line. So if I were left-handed, my rounds would be facing this way, just coming in towards the center. That way, whatever my support hand is able to grab those magazines with my index finger as I'm coming down and snatching. The other acceptable way to do this is what's called bullets out, which is also just as fast, and your bullets are going to be facing outwards. You'll see a lot of people use the bullets out way if they shoot like IPSC production or really any setup that involves a ton of magazines on the belt, because it's much easier to fit magazines bullets out compared to bullets in. Now, when you don't have a lot of mags on your belt, bullets in is better in my opinion, but again, this is personal preference, and there are shooters at the highest levels who subscribe to both setups. All right, that covers us for how to do these 3 reloads. Go dry fire them all at home. They are all useful in their own ways. Now we're going to be bringing on Grandmaster Jay Beal to talk to us about how to train the reload to an extreme level of competency once we have got the basics down. Let's get right into it. Firstly, thank you for coming on. This is going to be a pretty quick interview, and then hopefully it'll turn into more of like a free-form conversation.
I'm excited to be here, man. This is pretty cool. If I was new, I would want to find videos like this.
This is awesome. I've got a couple basic questions just to mainly like break the ice and then also give the viewers like a better perspective of who you are. First question, of course, is how long have you been shooting just in general for, like touching guns?
I mean, briefly when I was a kid, I would shoot with my dad, like 22s and stuff. But then I've been basically dry firing every day since 2015. But I didn't get into competition until like 2017. So I was doing like from concealment stuff, drawing, reloading, that kind of thing for a couple of years. And then I listened to a podcast where people were talking about like, if you want to get good, if you want to like, you know, see what good is shooting wise, then you have to go to a competition. So that's when I got like really tied into it. And that's when I started training really seriously.
I've got like 4 or 5 questions that came from me, and then all the ones I got from Instagram were mainly like joke questions. So first one is, would you agree that like reloads and other gun handling skills are best trained in dry fire rather than live fire?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 100%. So the only time that I would do a reload in live fire is if I wanted to make a video for something.
Right.
Or it was like built into a stage that I was doing, but I'm not going to practice reloads in isolation in live fire.
Now, the next question is, how often are you performing dry fire drills with a reload as a primary focus of the rep?
For myself now, it's still very frequent.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that, and you touched on it with getting the grip set, like, so you know what the grip is. So I'll put a reload in a sequence in dry fire so that I try to distract myself from something else with the reload. And then it'll make, I'll test my grip again after the reload. Mm-hmm. Test my ability to do one thing and then pull myself away from it doing a reload and then do another. So I still keep reloads in a lot of my dry fire. I don't know if I can put a percentage on it or not, but that's a lot.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, normally when you're reloading, does that really come from where you like set up a mini stage in your dry fire area and then you just pick a spot where you're like, okay, this is like the reloading area because there's a bit of movement here? Or do you also have sessions where you're like, I'm going to run like reloads back to back to back and really just like look at one target in between the reloads?
Yes, to both.
Okay, cool.
Like, so I mean, I'm switching guns right now, and I've
Right.
never, so when I'm switching guns, or if I'm building myself up a little bit with, like, I want to refresh the skill, then I'll put a full 10, 15 minutes on on doing reloads basically on one target, but within a different variation. So I'll like move into a spot and reload or whatever. And then, mini stages, a lot of times it'll be like I'll shoot 2 targets, and then I'm going to do a reload.
How often do you isolate portions of the reload when you're training?
If I'm talking to someone who is new, and this is what I do, because if I'm working on something, I'm talking to myself as if I'm new.
Right.
Again, coming from Steve Anderson, and what he has said before is like, you identify a skill that you want to improve. You isolate that skill into the segment that you have identified that you need to improve. So a segment of the reload, and then you improve that in isolation, and then you incorporate that into what we were just talking about, which is a mini stage, or a 2 reload 2, 6 reload 6, whatever. So you incorporate afterward, and that's where you test it. I mean, this morning I was isolating the first part of the reload, which is to get the magazine up to the magwell. The reload rarely gets messed up when you are at this point, and most of the time that comes from the grip on the magazine. That's like the first part. So getting a good grip on the magazine, and then it's back to what you were talking about, which is where are your eyes,
right?
And then there are other details to it where it's just if you're moving or not.
So I briefly mentioned how I taught like 3 different reloads in this video. There was, of course, the normal reload, which is what everyone in USPSA is doing because we're not letting our guns run dry, and there's no tactical reloads in USPSA. How often are you training like slide lock reloads, or those administrative reloads, as you call them, specifically, rather than the normal reloads?
To answer the question, just for myself, I don't specifically train the administrative reloads.
Right.
But I do them all the time.
Yeah.
And then as far as slide lock reloads, and I used to train them more. So in the past few years, I have not trained them at all.
Yeah.
But that being said, there was one time recently where I went to slide lock, and I needed to do a reload, and it didn't go as well as it could. Like, it wasn't an automatic thing.
Okay.
Because I hadn't trained him at first.
Right.
So like, I might mix them in there now, if that makes sense. So like, I might do some slide lock reloads, but I'm talking like in carry optics or production or limited optics in USPSA.
Yeah.
This is like, that's never happened to me, slide lock load.
Okay, that makes sense. So you lost a couple tenths because of the fact that you weren't specifically training them.
For sure. I still think never is a totally acceptable answer.
Right.
I'm thinking now because, like, when I get in the season, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
But right now, like, at some point during the year, for me in the going forward, I will do it. I will train them. For maybe it's only for like 3 weeks where I mix it in there, but I want it more fresh than it has been.
Okay, mental stuff, because we've been talking a lot throughout this conversation about the mental side of things, and then where not just visual focus but mental focus goes. Are there any cues that you have mentally as you're reloading on the clock that you look for, or is reloading just subconscious by the time you're actually shooting the match?
Well, I think it goes to the programming piece. When I am sequencing a stage in my mind, the only cue that I'm using there is that look to the magwell. And what that does for me is it allows it doesn't get overly specific, because then that brings in the conscious mind for me.
Right.
For me. So it'll bring in the conscious mind, and then I might have the thought of like, wow, I'm going to really smash that reload. And then the chances of it working out are lower.
Yes.
So it's a really simple thing. It's just like when I need to reload on a stage, I imagine where the magwell is, and that's where I'm going to look.
I think that just about wraps it.
It's great talking with you, dude.
Yeah, likewise. Again, thank you so much for your time. All right, that just about wraps us up for this video. Again, huge shout out to Jay for doing this interview with us. I hope you guys got some value from it. I certainly did. Him and I talked for a little over an hour actually, just to get that 7 minutes of interview footage for y'all. If you want to see the full conversation that we had, let me know in the comments and I'll put the work in to chop that up and then get it out to y'all. If you didn't notice it, one of the highlights from our conversation was when Jay said that he started shooting competitively to become a more competent concealed carrier. This is a story that myself and many other people who got into shooting share as well. Like any other fundamental shooting skill, reloads are one of the things that even shooters at the highest levels are always trying to work on refining. Put the work in, and I promise it will pay off. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope this video made you a better marksman.